session is about one of the key figures in sociology, who is also regarded as the founding fathers of sociology. I think so far we have looked at Emil Durkheim, we have looked at Auguste Comte, we also looked at Karl Marx. So we want to look at Max Weber, who introduced the more micro level analysis of society. So the first two thinkers, Emil Durkheim and Karl Marx, sort of adopted a more macro level society where they were more interested in what the society and the institutions of the society do to human behavior and human interactions, or what Marx was saying, the economic systems that we have, such as the capitalist neoliberal system. What does it do to human behavior and human interactions? So Max Weber was particularly interested in the micro aspects of everyday life, and he has a number of interesting concepts that he introduced. Social action, I think, is one of the key concepts that is associated with Max Weber. He also introduced the concept of bureaucracy, which is what we are going to focus more on this particular session. He also introduced the concept of ideal types. He introduced the concept of Westerhen. There are quite a number of concepts. Rationalization. These are important concepts in his theorization. I think he also has an important text that is the Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where he was emphasizing the importance of ideas and religious ideologies in the development of Western capitalism. So Max Weber emphasized that a society's transition from traditional rural-based kind of systems to urban and modern systems, the societies are going to be more rationalized. So rationalization is an important concept that Weber introduced to explain the change in the society, or the evolution and transformation of societies. So rationalization can be explained using three interrelated concepts: the concept of calculability, the concept of predictability, the concept of methodical behavior, but also even reflexivity. These are some of the concepts that are associated with rationalization. And he also emphasized that with modernity, we also see the decline of religion, what is often referred to as secularization, where religion is pushed to the periphery of people's everyday life. It becomes more privatized in people's life, rather than being very public and influential. So rationalization of everyday life, according to Max Weber, is the defining feature of modern societies, or the defining feature of modernity. And he was emphasizing that people become more calculative, people become more rational. So, for instance, if you are in business, Weber would argue that if you know the inputs, then you are definitely going to know the outputs. If you know the inputs, you know the profit. That's what rationality and calculability is all about. You can calculate what you manage to get from your businesses. So Weber was sort of critiquing traditional societies and traditional forms of doing things. He introduced a number of different types of actions that are associated with this evolution of society from a very traditional to a modern society. And he was saying traditional societies are marked by what he referred to as traditional authority as well as traditional action. So traditional action is the kind of action that's driven by customs. And traditional authority, according to Weber, is actually marked by a affective action where decisions are based on people's personal relationships, kinship relationships, customs, and what he referred to as particularism, meaning to say that there's an element of nepotism or favoritism if we are to use concepts of the modern society. But he was so critical of traditional authority and traditional forms of action because he believed that when you have affective action, for instance, it's action that's actually driven by our emotions and our attachments to people, and as a result, these might be very subjective actions that we take, which might be problematic in the ways in which things are done. So he emphasized on what he referred to as instrumental rationality or instrumentally rational action, as well as value rational action. So instrumentally rational action is where people choose efficient means to achieve their goals. So an organization is expected, for instance, to choose the most efficient ways of attaining the organizational goals. And value rational action, which is another key action that he identified, is based when we act on the basis of our held norms, values, and belief systems, sometimes regardless of the consequences. So Weber was very critical of traditional forms of authority and traditional forms of action because he felt that these undermine efficiency, especially within organizations. So he introduced what he referred to as the ideal type, which is based on legal rational authority. And this is, of course, an ideal type. Ideal, in this sense, emphasizes ideas of efficiency rather than normative. But it was more interested in identifying the most efficient ways of attaining organizational goals. So he was saying that as organizations grow from very simple organizations to complex organizations, they tend to move towards bureaucratization, right? They become bureaucratized, meaning to say that they tend to operate on the basis of legal, rational authority. So the ideal type of bureaucracy by Weber is based on the most efficient form of rationality. So it's characterized by a hierarchy of very clearly defined offices where each office below reports to the one above it. And when you think of governments, when you think of universities, when you think of big chain stores, in most cases they tend to take this kind of structure where they are hierarchical. You have very few people that at the top, but they are the most influential and powerful. And as you go down, you have more and more people. But you'd actually see that these organizations operate on a very clearly defined division of labor and specialization. So people take up specialized roles on the basis of their qualifications and their professions. So within the government, for instance, you have the president, then you have the vice president, then you have your ministers, you have your MPs, you have your permanent secretaries, your technocrats, going down in that order. So even when it comes to communication, the ideal type of bureaucracy emphasizes on formality. That communication, it has to be done in a very strictly formalized way. So if you have a problem with a particular issue that you want, for instance, to get to, let's say, the chancellor of the university or the vice chancellor of the university, and maybe you are a student or you are a lecturer, you have to go to your immediate line managers. Those line managers would also take that issue to their immediate line managers above, up until it gets to the person that, or the people that are supposed to hear that kind of message. So the line of communication is expected to be very formalized and follow a very strict channel, either either going up or going down. So ideal type of bureaucracies are also characterized by what Weber refers to as meritocracy, where people are hired to positions on the basis of their technical qualifications, on the basis of their experience. So the more experienced you are, the more qualified, the better your chances of being hired in particular positions. So it's based on merit rather than on affect or connections. But of course, this is only the ideal type. In reality, this might not be the case. And I think that's one of the critique that's given against Weber's ideal type of bureaucracy, that in as much as he emphasizes on meritocracy, but you might have one or two examples where favoritism, nepotism happens even within bureaucratic organizations that are supposed to run on the basis of merit. Then there is also emphasis on impersonality and strict following of impersonal procedures. And impersonality is where our personal connections and ties and our personal values in most cases do not influence the way in which we operate, the ways in which we run organizations. So you might be very religious, or you might be holding tight to some specific values, but the expectation is that they are not supposed to influence how you run and how you treat people. Otherwise, then there would be a lot of biases that might come maybe on the basis of people that believe in values that are not necessarily part of what you believe in. Then there are formal rules and regulations that are expected to be strictly followed within these bureaucratic organizations. So there are specific ways of doing things, and you cannot bend the rules in bureaucratic organizations. If you do so, the consequences might mean you might be removed or fired from your positions, because there are strict formal rules and regulations that are followed within bureaucratic organizations. It also operates on written records. Everything has to be based on a paper trail or written records. It might be memos when you are communicating to different offices. Everything has to be based on written records which are kept. And in this case, you'd actually see that this is important for accountability and transparency within bureaucratic organizations. And Weber felt that this was the most efficient way of attaining organizational goals, where there's transparency, there's accountability, because there's a clearly defined hierarchy of authority where one office reports to the one above it, where there are formal rules that are supposed to be strictly followed. Then there's also impartiality when it comes to decision making, that individuals within bureaucratic organizations are supposed to be impartial, they're supposed to be fair, they're supposed to be objective in the ways in which they run these organizations. So people emphasize on a very clear separation of an individual and the office. So the power is within the office rather than the individual. And I think the example of a government is a typical, very good example that we can give, that a president might be charismatic and very popular, but the power does not rest in the person. The power rests in the office that that particular person holds. The chancellor or vice chancellor is not the individual, but it's the office that is the power. So the moment one leaves that particular office, they might not be as powerful as they used to be. So in this case, we are saying there's a clear separation of a personal power with formal power, which is within the office that one occupies. So this is part of Weber's ideal type of bureaucracy, and it has received a fair amount of criticism from some scholars who believe that bureaucratic organizations are a sort of an iron cage of bureaucracy, where people's freedoms and liberties are violated and not really taken seriously. Some people also felt that in bureaucratic organizations there's very limited opportunities for democratic decision making, and actually people say, one who says bureaucracy says oligarchy, meaning to say that it's only a few people that are in most cases making the most important and strategic decisions within that particular organization. Some people also critique saying, it stifles human potential and human creativity because there's very little room for innovation. You have to strictly follow the rules and regulations, even when you feel that maybe they might not be the most efficient or they might be outdated, and there are new and more efficient ways. If these are the ways in which that organization has been operating and functioning, then you are in most cases required to follow those strict formal rules and regulations. And of course, some people emphasize that formality in most cases might also create power dynamics which might frustrate the workers, and therefore you might have what some scholars refer to as soldiering, where people are not necessarily efficiently executing their roles, even though there is a hierarchy of offices where there's pressure on accountability and transparency. So there are also a number of other concepts that we are going to be looking at in other sessions later on. For instance, Weber is well known for sort of arguing with Marx, especially with regards to issues of class, issues of capitalism, and we're going to look at the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, one of his key texts, where he also foregrounds this idea of rationalization, the ideas of religion and religious dogma, and how these shaped the development of Western modernity and Western capitalism. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to talk about today.